So Michael, you were saying we have an idea about some of the competitions coming up, the ones that will be.
Yeah. I'm gonna here
more than-
tonight. I can mention here real quickly. So the one that we have coming up in March 3rd, so that's just in a couple of weeks, is on, the themes will be motion and still life. And we will very soon, because I know it makes sense for people to know what these are well ahead of time in that. So here in the next couple of weeks, we'll get out a list for. So what we're doing is this year we'll have 6 competition nights altogether, 3 of which will be open and 3 of which will be theme. Most of those theme ones will have, again, 2 themes, just so you don't get pinned into, putting something out there that certain people don't have the right equipment for or whatever in that. So at least they have a couple of options. But I know Dave, you and I talked about, and we'll bring it up to some of the others in that. Usually we will definitely include portraits somewhere in there along the lines, and that we'll include, maybe an architecture category in that. And we'll come up with a couple other ones in that that'll give people a chance to test their skills on maybe things that get them out to try something new.
So Michael, yeah, we should probably get the one for March out pretty soon, because if it's March 3rd, we probably should do that.
Yeah, that just went out. There was, I think Paul Malinowski sent, he's not on here tonight.
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we got an email. Okay.
Yeah, there's one that went out and that had the link. We'll put out another reminder here maybe in the next couple days, and we'll go with that. Yeah, because the entries for that would be due Sunday the 27th, which is not this coming Sunday, but a week from Sunday.
28th. The 28th is Sunday.
Did I get the wrong day?
That's okay. Close enough. We all join at the last second anyway.
That's right.
Should be fun.
We'll give it a few more minutes. There's still a few people joining in here.
I always like the competitions. It just blows me away what people submit here in the club. It's really fun to see how artistic people really are.
Yeah, there's some good photographers, that's for sure.
Guys always inspire me to try something different. I always see somebody's picture and say, hey, I got to try that.
Yeah, it says the photographer of the year.
Right.
That's right.
And I don't know if you saw or not, Carino, but we do have, and I apologize for these coming in late, but the awards are in hand and we will get those to you. And I want to make sure that, I know every year when we get at least those top couple, yours included, get some recognition out on the website and that. So we'll get that taken care of here soon.
Yeah, when you get them, we'll have to have you guys on our next Zoom meeting, hold them up so we can see them. Here's my award. Can you see it?
Yeah.
There it is.
Oh, but you already have it? Oh, okay.
Got it today.
I didn't realize that it was delivered. Well, good.
That looks better than mine.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations. That's fantastic. And again, and we'll go over this. I'll start here the meeting in a second, but and you've been just taking photos for what, about 2 years, a little over 2 years, a little less than, something like that. So yeah, that was fantastic. You and Ashley both came in with only a couple years of experience and really did well.
I think I have filters older than Carino right now.
Elaine, I'm hoping that you're going to have a Saturday weekend expose on Creole cooking so that we can all not learn anything, but eat your food, because your photos for that are amazing.
Let me know when you're ready. I just made like a huge, oh gosh. So I just got back had a quick trip to Louisiana. So I got to restock some supplies, and with it being cold last week, and I made like a gigantic pot of gumbo.
Oh, but what do you bring back? Like possum and armadillo.
Oh, man. No, just some really good smoked sausage and other smoked meat.
I couldn't resist. I couldn't resist.
You know, you and my husband.
I lived a year in Lafayette, and so I just fell in love with the cooking down there. So it was really fun.
Elaine, are you eating a king cake now?
Well, I brought one back with me just because normally I don't get to head down there while during king cake season. But you know, that's
I
kind of
saw
over
one at King Supers. believe it or
yesterday.
not.
Yeah, except that those ones at King Supers are the ones here. I mean, they're a little bit too politically correct, and you're not allowed to cook the baby into the cake anymore. Like you know, they've only been doing this for hundreds of years. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
suddenly going
Not
to
a
eat.
real baby.
So Dave, when you were down there, are you familiar with Mesh's Donuts?
Oh yeah.
That's where I get my king cake.
Oh my God.
Yep.
Dave's going to be at your door tonight about 10 o'clock
Yeah, I'll be right over.
with his plate and his fork.
I'll let you know next time I head down. I might be driving. I may take some grocery orders.
You might need a big truck. Maybe run a U-Haul then.
You know, I have thought about buying a refrigerated truck and starting a delivery service. There are a lot of people in Colorado from Louisiana. I think I could make some money.
Yeah.
I'll bet. And even those who aren't from Louisiana, who just like the food, you could make some
Oh,
money there too.
Hey, there's over here in Lone Tree, there's a little Indian store, you know, from, well, India, Pakistan, whatever. And that place is always busy. There's a lot of people in there buying a lot of stuff. I've never been in it, but it's definitely, you know, there's definitely a market for it.
Yeah, I considered at one point whether or not it would be lucrative to set up like a little grocery store where you sold the product. You didn't make the you know, the sausages and that type of stuff. You just, you know,
Sourced it.
bought it down from down there and shipped it in with a lot of other things that are kind of hard to get up here.
Yeah, no, it makes sense because they're, you know, people have moved around so much and they like what they like from their, you know, you can't get it here. It's different here.
You know, and then there's different little places. The funny part is, you know, most people all have their favorite little shop, their favorite little mom and pop shop that makes, you know, their sausage or boudin or crackling or whatever whatever you get. And there's always a big debate between, it's like, no, this store is the best. No, you got to have this store over here. No. It's, you guys don't know what you're doing. It's
like Pat and Gino's for the steak, you know, the cheesesteaks in Philadelphia. They're right across the street from me.
yeah. I'm sure any place, you know, cheesesteaks or Italian food, I bet it's all the same, you know.
All right, well, Joe's with us, Michael, so whenever
Yeah.
you're
Yeah, great. Thank you for joining us tonight, Joe. We'll look forward to your presentation. I'll go ahead and kind of get started here real quick, just kind of hitting a couple of things that we have coming up again. Again, thanks for everybody for attending. This now is meeting number 4 here for the 2021. Hopefully one of these days we'll be able to actually go meet in person, but once again, at least we do have technology and we've had some pretty good success here with these meetings and that in terms of presentations, competitions, exhibitions, and some of the other things that we've been able to accomplish with this. So again, thank you everybody for your continuous engagement in these programs. We are looking at a couple of things, you know, while again, obviously we cannot, you know, meet in person indoors and that right now, but there's some thought here that maybe, you know, with at least smaller groups and that starting to kind of do a few things maybe outdoors, that maybe being, you know, maybe a couple of the local state parks, something like that. Just if nothing else, just to get out and see each other again and learn a few things out on the field from one another. So not necessarily formal workshops that are being scheduled yet, but maybe just, again, small gatherings and that at a couple of parks. So again, we've talked about this as maybe start doing a couple of those things, maybe starting in May, June, and maybe through a few of the summer months and that as as the weather starts to improve in that. Again, thanks again. Tonight we do have Joe Klocek. Thank you for joining us tonight to present on capturing perfect color. I believe you're speaking about capturing color correctly in camera, and then also editing for accurate color, proofing for printing, and then the printing to get the color that's similar to what we see on our screens. Some of the things that I know I have challenges with, so I'm curious and anxious to see what points you bring up on that. I do want to just real quickly just kind of go through a few of the reminders of a few of the things that we have coming up. Earlier here tonight, we were talking about March 3rd, so that's just in what, I guess, a couple of weeks. A Wednesday night, the competition. The theme is going to be motion and still life. There's some information out on the website. There was an email that went out. We'll get out a reminder email on that also, but be sure to get your pictures ready to present for the motion and still life categories. Those would be due Sunday. I had this wrong, February 28th, I guess, or the last day of the month. And the judge for that one is going to be Scott Wilson. He's a nature, landscape, wildlife photographer. He also does some cityscape type stuff. It's got some wild Mustang photos that are pretty impressive in that I've seen from out on the western side of the state. So he will be our judge that night. Following that, 2 weeks later, on March 17th, we have Dale Ralph is going to be presenting on compositing. April 7th is another exhibition night. We just had one of these a couple weeks ago, and it was real successful. I know I always learn a lot from those. For those that are new here tonight and haven't attended those, you get to submit up to 4 images. And then as a group, we don't judge them. They don't get scored, but you can at least give a little bit of your story behind how you took the images, what your thought process was, maybe what you're processing, how you processed it. And then you also get open feedback just from the other participants on the call. So we had, again, a successful one of those exhibition night meetings a couple weeks ago. So that will be April 17th. So it's still a couple months away. April 21st, we have Alice Bender is going to be presenting on impressionist type photography. May 5th, we have that'll be our next competition night. And that one, there are no games, so that's open. So you're able to submit anything on that night. May 19th, we have Glenn Randall. He's going to be presenting on photographing meteor showers. I know he does some workshops over the time of the Perseid meteor shower and that. So he'll be kind of going over what he's looking for in terms of that type of night photography. June 2nd, we have another one of our exhibition nights. June 16th, Joseph Roybal, he'll be presenting on colored theory for landscape photography. In July, I don't have the date yet. Bruce, you might know the date on this, but I believe in July, we're doing another one of our scavenger hunts. It's a lot of fun.
July 21st is what we
21st, okay. 21st, one of the scavenger hunts. And we've done these the last couple of years, and they're a lot of fun. It's a real, people get creative in that too, with regards to the processing and what they come up with on the images. Separate from that, we're still working on arranging some additional programs through the rest of the year. I was going to mention real quick, I put out on the chat, I can go see, I think it should still be out there, but there's a program that we got invited to. It was Renee Gray, I guess the wife of Tim Gray, presenting. He's presenting to camera clubs in Florida this Sunday. So it's 10 o'clock their time, but it's 8 o'clock our time. So it's an early start, but you don't have to attend every item that he's doing, but his keynote speech begins at, I guess, 8 o'clock our time. But he'll be covering various topics, primarily on landscape photography. Kind of wrote down a few of the things that he's covering. He's got, again, his keynote presentation is on lesson learned from his favorite photos, top photo accessories, favorite features of Lightroom, Photoshop features that he uses, the role of planning in photography, and then improving your photography. And he's got a Q&A. So each one of those topics goes, I think it's like roughly an hour or so, something like that. But it starts at like 8 in the morning and goes through the better part of the early afternoon. So again, they reached out to me on that and said that our club is welcome to and encouraged to attend. If you can't make it to all of them, at least try and join a few of them. I put a link out there on the chat for that. So again, that's this Sunday. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce again tonight. Thank you, Joe, for joining us tonight and presenting on capturing perfect color. Let's see, Joe is a resident of Denver, has been a professional photographer since 2005, has some sales experience and also some instructional books and videos. I believe the author of 5 books. I think on the information that we showed, it said something about 3, but when I went to the website, I'm pretty sure I saw 5 on there. So I think that's what we've got. And then he also has some online courses and then photography cheat sheets that he has available, I believe, at Mike's Camera. The topics on his books and on his presentations include a wide area of photographic topics in that, including studio lighting, travel photography, birds of prey, wild mustangs, landscapes, night photography, composition, and macro photography. So I can't think of too many things that leaves out when it comes to the overall photography scene. Some of the information on his courses and books can be found out on his website, the F-Stops here, and I'll be sure and put a link out on our chat for that as well. So with that, Joe, I don't know if you have anything else that you would like to add to that in terms of your background, or if anybody else has any questions. If not, we'll go ahead and let you go ahead and jump into your presentation. I believe you should have access to the share.
No, you made me sound a lot cooler than I actually am. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. Can everyone hear me all right? Yeah. Yes?
Yep, sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah, most of them are on mute right now, so yes.
Yeah, most of them are on mute there. I was looking for anyone nodding ahead, or because it's always interesting speaking, and I teach in this room like once a week because I teach majority of the online classes for Mike's Camera, and you're always speaking like into this void. And the thing that always scares me is my microphone live? Like, am I just rambling for an hour and no one can hear a thing? So that's like a big concern that I regularly have. So thank you for that introduction. Very appreciated. I do a couple things for a living. I sell equipment at Mike's Camera. It's where I'm found throughout, kind of the day job hours. I am the primary instructor for Mike's Camera, and big kind of catalog of classes that I do right now. They're all online, teaching just in like I said, inside of this room here every Tuesday on a big variety, as you said there. And I also have my own side business called the F-Stops Here, and the website is thefstopshere.org. While I'm predominantly just being seen on the camera, I want to point out that I'm going to be talking about 2 things, 2 physical products. I just want you to see them here. I've got pictures of them in a slideshow. But the first one is going to be a monitor calibrator. That's what this is. It's just literally that big. We're going to be talking about this extensively tonight and how important this is. But it's just a tiny little thing. We'll be talking about that. That's what that looks like. The other thing is going to be called a color checker passport. It looks just like this. It's the size of my hand. Very important tool. We will be talking about this in some detail tonight. So it's going to be important that you just see what those kind of look like. They're small pieces, but they're some of the most important tools that I have in my office here. And my office is just where I do everything for photography, from actually teaching, writing classes, writing books. The reason that I say 3, by the way, is I have 3 full-length books that I actually charge money for. The other 2 are 20-page, kind of very short books that I developed. They are free downloads that are compendiums to one-on-one class, not one-on-one classes, but classes that I do experientially. So anyway, that's the difference between the 3 and the 5. Okay, let's jump into it here. So I want to screen share, and let's see. how do you do just desktop share, I suppose?
Yeah, if you go to the bottom of the screen, it'll say screen share in the middle, it's green. And if you click on
Yeah, I did that. I want to make sure I just share whatever's on my screen. Is that desktop share?
no, it should show you all the different desktops you have, and just to pick the one that's like desktop 1 or 2 or 3.
Yeah, it just gives me desktop 1.
But
So
you'll-
do me a favor here. If I just do this, I work through Click Meeting all the time, and I guess I'm not set up or regularly will not be able to record the contents of your screen until the screen. Sorry, it's giving me something I've never seen before. Zoom US will not be able to record the contents of your screen until it is quit. Does that mean I have to quit out of Zoom? Is that what that means?
I don't know. Let me pause recording on my side.
Screen share. Oh, it's actually different. So if I just do this, you should be seeing my just normal screen, everything, my background, this little thingamajig, that's my security and privacy preferences. Is that correct? Is that what you're
Yep.
seeing?
Yep.
Okay, good. So theoretically, that's working. And everything's still working there, I assume. Yes?
Yes. Yes.
So if I come over here, you're seeing a presentation, right?
Correct.
All right, now it should be full screen. All right, groovy. So I've never found a great name for this content. I love this content. I think it's quite possibly the most important single bit of content that I teach, but it's the one that it's the least sexy, for lack of a better word. I'm not going to be teaching you how to capture an amazing image of a bird in flight. I'm not going to be teaching you the perfect way of posing a model tonight. What we're going to be talking about is a process. This is a process-driven conversation, and it's about color, and saying that color is not something we leave up to chance. It's not something that we've got to worry about as we purchase our camera. It's a process where we can get accurate color at the moment of capture. We can begin then building out full color spectrum. We'll talk about that. We can edit with confidence, knowing we're seeing full color spectrum. And we can print with the knowledge that our production will actually look like our monitor. There's a process for that. And so we're going to, in a generalized term, take this in the order of shooting through printing. That's going to be our order tonight. And I'm not just going to be inside of this presentation screen, this keynote address. I'm actually going to be bouncing back and forth to a number of pieces of software. So this is actually one class that I do that is actually, I think, dramatically better being taught in like an online platform, because I'm going to be using several different pieces of software to be able to just walk you through a process. So we're going to start with understanding something called custom camera profiles. We're going to move into monitor calibration and editing. We're going to discuss what Icc profiles are. We're going to talk about the ins and outs of color space and how it relates to different forms of production, because it is not as simple or straightforward as do everything Adobe RGB, which is what a lot of people end up saying. And we're going to end up talking about the actual printer calibration, paper type, paper Icc profiles, things like that. So that's kind of where we're headed. And the direction that we're moving. As we said, these are the 3 books that are on the iBook store. They're on my website, macro photography, travel photography, and I have 1 book on advanced topics, and that's called 7 Photos to Make You a Better Photographer. And it's 7 challenging images that just by the nature of forcing yourself to shoot them will make you a better photographer. And so that's those. And then I do have, through my business, I'm the creator of something called Photography Cheat Sheets. And this is an educational product. Right now, they're in Mike's Camera, and I'm looking at expanding into other stores throughout the US this year. And they're on just every topic that I could basically sit down and think about, which on one side is going to say we're shooting landscape or macro or whatever. My recommendation of settings to plug in to get started with that. And then the other side is 1 paragraph instruction on how to shoot that subject matter. Simple, straightforward. I'm very proud of them. And I believe the best selling educational product Mike's Cameras carry. So that's cool. Anyway, the bare bones of this, just this PDF of my presentation is actually available as a free download through my website, as are the PDFs of all of the classes that I teach. There are no speaker's notes in there. That's what you pay money for the classes at Mike's or whatever. But the actual PDF of what I talk about at any of my classes is downloadable in case you want to see the stuff that I talk about. Okay, so there's normally a slide that I just skipped over when I teach this to introductory groups about the importance of raw imaging. But I am just assuming when I speak to a photo club like Lone Tree that everybody here is very familiar with the importance of shooting raw image quality. Nothing I talk about tonight is possible unless you shoot in RAW. All right, so with that said, let's talk a little bit about the color being recorded by your camera. And 3 years ago, no one had ever heard the phrase color science. Like, it just wasn't in my regular vocabulary. And all of a sudden, it's like 20% of the conversations I'm having. And there is this conception that's being created in the minds of the camera buying public and the photographing public, that you get one kind of color from one company, one kind of color from another company, and you need to be very careful about purchasing the right camera system because you're locked into the way that they think about color. And the idea of color science is actually a very real thing. There is no standardization in the photography industry for what is blue, what is green. Every company has to figure that out for themselves. And so the way they actually define those terms is different. The way that they program processors is different. And then, of course, the sensors and just the actual putting together of the camera can be marginally different. It is actually possible that you could take 3 D850s off of the line and test them, and they can produce marginally different color. That won't be dramatic, but it can be marginally different. Moreover, it is true that you will see the color being recorded. And by color being recorded, what I really mean is we see what is left over, right? It'd be more accurate to say that every camera system in the world is missing chunks of the full color spectrum of all naturally occurring colors. And because every company is going to actually approach the issue of color differently, you are going to see different companies missing different chunks. So generically speaking, you can say that Sony is missing a number of warm tones generically. I've actually not experienced that. I think they're actually missing a number of green tones personally, and I'll show you my experience. And Canon is typically missing a number of blue tones, and that's another generic thing. Now, the reason that I believe people talk about color in relationship to Sony more often than any other company is that when you're missing part of the warm color spectrum, that affects human skin tone. And so we notice it more when we're missing chunks of warm color spectrum tones than cool. But in fact, every camera in the world is missing part of the full color spectrum. That is just the reality. Full frame cameras maintain more than APS-C, but your camera, my camera, and whatever the next great camera is going to be missing part of the color spectrum. Then there's, of course, a question of whether or not it's recording higher saturation values. We're actually going to put that aside for right now. And we're just looking at, are we missing part of the camera, the full color spectrum? And in fact, we are. So there arises then two major things we think about in relationship to missing part of the color spectrum. The first is, well, I want it, right? And that's in and of itself just fair, right? I want all of the greens and the purples and the blues and the yellows and the oranges. The second is if I am shooting some kind of an event and I've got a second shooter and we're working with different cameras, God forbid, different brands, my client needs to be able to hang images on her wall from both cameras where you cannot discern the difference between the two. Now, please note here that I'm not talking about white balance. All right, I'm not talking about neutral point where white is white, gray is gray. I'm saying if you have a neutral point, that's correct. That means you've centered your target. Missing part of the color spectrum is missing part of that target board. So just imagine a dartboard. White balance is where gray is actually in the middle, 18% gray is in the middle, and having full color spectrum is an actual round board. We all are missing part of that chunk. And so the very first thing that we really want to talk about then is how do we build that back out? And that is what our color checker passport is for. Again, I'm going to show you a picture, but I know that I'm on the screen there. That's actually what this guy is. All right, it's color swatches. We're going to examine it in a little bit more detail with the photograph, so I'm not holding it up to the camera. So I want to jump over here. Notice I'm saying that if we build a camera profile, a custom camera profile, then we are basically determining what colors this camera, and I did say and lens, a little bit of nuance there in a second, is actually producing, and we can do it per each lighting scenario. I've actually not really needed to do that much. I have this for studio lights, for shade, for direct sunlight, and I use the direct sunlight one pretty much all the time, and it builds out color perfectly. And this is building out color that is missing out of the color spectrum. So this is an image of my color checker passport, and I actually just want to walk through what this thing is. This is made by a company called X-Rite. I just have not seen anybody else produce something that does this same job yet. The other company that might is Spyder, S-P-Y-D-E-R. They make exceptional quality products as well. Because Mike's camera carries X-Rite, that's what I'm familiar with. Anyway, this is the color checker passport. This is the top, this is the bottom. We're going to walk through what this is. Up here, we have some very basic tones. All right, some very basic tones we can just use just for matching. And then notice I've got a little person and I've got a little landscape. And we've got one with a notch out of it right there, one with a notch out of it right there. So please note that here I've got a gray and then it gets bluer and bluer and bluer. From the landscape looking one, okay, I've got a notch in the middle. It gets bluer on this side and it gets slightly warmer on the left. This is a white balance correction patch. So with skin tone, we either get it neutral or we slightly warm, which is why this gets cooler because the opposite of cool tones is warm. With landscape, I might want to warm or cool the landscape off of a neutral white balance point. So if I just hold this sucker up in a lighting environment and shoot a picture of it, I can white balance off of it. And that's nice in and of itself. That's by no means why we own these, why they're important, but I can white balance right off of it. And then I have some swatches to be able to set white and black point to be able to determine if my histogram is clipping my highlights or my shadows. So that's just exposure control and white balance control. The real power is the bottom. You're going to notice we start with a brown and kind of a tan. Those are based around human skin tone, darker skinned people, lighter skinned people. Then we've got a blue and a green that are supposed to be representative of colors that naturally occur in blue skies and green grass. And then we have very bold colors of very different hues spread throughout. And then of course, another gray chart. And that's where the power of this thing is really built. So when you want to create a custom profile, you're doing it for your camera. You're doing it for your camera in a specific lighting condition. I've had less necessity of that, though I did build these profiles. And then people who get really down a rabbit hole in this like to do this for a particular lens on a particular camera because lenses are not color matched with only two exceptions. Nikon and Leica, interestingly, are the only two companies that color match all of their lenses. If you shoot with any other brand, there's no guarantee that your lenses are color matched to each other. That said, I just can't be bothered. I have not yet experienced a difference from the variety of lenses I have on my camera system. And so I do not do different profiles per lens, because we would just get a exponentially growing variety of profiles, but you certainly could. So we shoot a picture of this, and it needs to be 25% of the frame. Cool. And we can white balance off of it, meaning you can shoot a picture in the field and you can get your neutral point. The power becomes when I bring it in here, I take just this image and I export it as a TIFF, and then I need the color checker camera calibration software. This is free. So the way X-Rite does things is if you buy the product, the software is free. Some companies do the opposite, right? So if you buy the software, the product is free. The way that they basically control profitability is by having the products available, and then anyone can download the software, but it doesn't work without the product, right? So anyway, I've got that over here, and let me minimize the thing that shows my face. So I just have I exported that earlier today as a TIFF. And I'm not going to go through the whole process of actually building a profile because it takes a while for the computer to actually build it. But I just want to show you what it looks like. Notice it immediately finds the swatches at the bottom. And now it's just asking me to make sure that these boxes are centered there. And then I would just hit create profile. At that point, the system is going to create a profile for this camera in this lighting condition. I can name it whatever I want. I have to restart my photo editing software. Right now, this works with Photoshop, Lightroom, and Capture One. Those are the three softwares. I'm using Capture One here. And then I'm going to have the ability, let me kind of zoom in on this because I really want you to see what's about to happen. So then it will show up as a profile. This is going to be in different places for different softwares. In Capture One, I hate the name that they give it. It's under something called base characteristics, which is not a good name. But base characteristics, you'll find Icc Profile. Icc stands for International Color Consortium. And it's a governing body on color. Is basically what it is. They're a governing body on color for all things reproduction. Notice I said before that there's no governing body for what is blue at the manufacturing level, but there is at the reproduction level. And so what I want you to see here is I'm going to switch my profile from the generic one that Capture One gives me to something built off of this profile. Now, what the profile did before I actually do this is it knows what all these colors should look like. It knows what they actually are. And so if there's a difference between what's recorded by my camera, given that I have white balanced properly, and I custom white balance, of course, off of the swatch, if there's a difference between that and what it should be, it can build a set of corrections that turn my images into what they should look like. And of course, a calibration, just generically speaking, is nothing more than a set of corrections that takes a result and turns it into a known standard. That's it. That's all calibration is. So what I'm going to do here is my custom-made profiles are under other. And so I'm just going to go to the one here. Now, what I want you to watch before I do this, the purple, the blue, the green are some of the most dramatic. And I will go back and forth a couple times so you can see the difference. And you're going to see that my camera is actually missing purples and it's missing greens pretty dramatically. And there we go. So I'll do it again so that everyone can see this. Okay. So the green, the purple, the deep blues. Take a look, right? Generic and custom. Generic, custom. That is the set of colors that I am missing natively out of my camera. That's what I am missing. I actually showed you a little example at the very beginning of class. I transitioned that landscape image from a before custom profile to an after during the course of that opening, but I'm going to do it again for you here. This is going to be a real life example. So here's a picture of the maroon bells, and I am going to first, I think I just need to take my shadows and bring them up a little bit just so we can see a little bit better. Hopefully you can see that all right. But remember, my camera is missing some greens. And it's also, it turns out, missing some bright yellows, and it kind of adds this magenta hue into my images. And so I'm just going to switch from the generic profile to that exact same daylight one. And I'm going to go back and forth. I know there's a dust spot. I know it's bothering everybody. I correct it every time that I do an example with it. Don't worry, I see it. All right, so generic. Notice how it's so much more magenta and a little bit more tonal because of that magenta kind of overcast than the actual image should be. And that's what it actually looked like right there. And so I've had to make one custom profile, and I get to apply it to all of my images. And what it does is, if I shoot with a variety of cameras, as long as I have a profile for each one, they'll all look the same. And now I've got also 100% color spectrum that I'm able to work with. So no longer am I limited by having a camera that produces more greens or more blues or whatever it is with your particular camera. We're able to take that piece of equipment and build in all of the color that it is missing. And we're all missing something. It's just missing different parts of color spectrum. All right. So with that one tool, we can build out full color spectrum, and we can get neutral point, which means we can get down to work. And getting down to work is really a matter for me of making sure before I do anything that I have a monitor that is actually calibrated. This is not a trivial matter. When you have any kind of a monitor screen, and I know there's going to be several people inside of this Zoom chat here that have been doing monitor calibration, any one of them will tell you that it is a dramatic, it's a dramatic difference in the results you're able to achieve. All monitors do two things. They do not come out of the box actually showing you the image that you have that you've actually created. It's not showing you your image. It's showing you an enhanced version of your image. That's thing one. Thing two is that all monitors drift. So let's talk about those in turn. First, monitors never come out of the box actually showing you your image without adjustment. And there's a couple reasons for this. The first is that if you were to actually take a poll, right, take an electronic poll and see what are video cards used for in machines today, and just break it down into a pie chart, you would find that the vast majority of video cards are being used for watching movies, playing video games, and, well, now Zoom calls, right? Taking out the Zoom call thing, video games and movies are two activities where your experience is actually enhanced if we add brightness, add contrast, and add saturation to what we're watching. Now, that's very, very nice for video games. It's very, very nice for watching movies, but it absolutely destroys your ability to be accurate when editing your photos. If you are not calibrating your monitor, then when you edit, you are actually editing your screen. You're not editing your image. And so since the machine is really built and initially programmed to enhance brightness and contrast and saturation, when you get back any sort of a reproduction, not only will it not look like your screen, the image will be darker and it will be less contrasty than you had edited. And this is the number one complaint that those of us who work in photo reproduction here is, oh, this doesn't look like my screen, right? Obviously, you guys are doing something wrong, but in fact, that's the image that you gave us. And a little bit of monitor calibration will save you time, energy, money, and a lot of frustration. And so I want to talk about different things that actually do this job. You saw me hold up my In fact, let me actually do a little, let me do this. I recalibrated my laptop before class, and they give you a before and after calibration. They give you a before and after, and this is a very, very small part of the screen, but we're really looking at color. Let's see if it will actually show me, and I don't know. All right, that's not showing me the difference that I saw there. Don't worry, I've got another example inside of the presentation. Okay, how do I get this bar to move? Can I do that? I can do that, cool. All right, so don't worry, there's gonna be an example later on that's built in. That didn't show what I wanted to show. I put that together real fast before class started. Okay, this is a basic monitor calibrator. It's called the Color Monkey Smile. And honestly, it's great. It does a monitor calibration. It's accurate. It's good. Run with it. Cool. It's like $100 bucks. For a long time, I used, let's see, why is it not going to the next? It's not, that's weird. So it's doing something here where it's not letting me work with my, it's not letting me advance my thing. I'm going to stop screen sharing for just a second. Give me a second here. Okay, let's come back to Zoom. Sorry about that, everybody. Let's try this again. All right, so let's try it again. Let's move this down here. All right. It is doing something where it's not letting me advance this if I am screen sharing. So that's weird.
Yeah, maybe try to re-screen share and see if it brings it back, because it was advancing, right?
Yeah.
It was, yeah, but I've stopped screen sharing twice.
Like right there, if you go down to say like your next slide down, but without.
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump to this and see what happens. Let's see if this works. If not, well, we'll figure something out. I'm not worried. Okay. All right, for some reason that one slide like kills the whole thing. Who's to say? All right, so this is what I used for a long time. It still is available. It's called Color Monkey Display. This does something where it will measure the ambient light in the room where you're working. And at a time of your choosing, every hour, every 90 minutes, whatever, it will actually adjust the brightness of your screen so that it is the same viewability in different lighting conditions. So if you work around a window, this is a very, very useful thing. I used to have my office in an upstairs room with a big, big window in it. And that is something that will totally change the way that your editing looks. Now, both of those two products, it did it again, man. I don't want to have to jump in and out every time I want to advance a slide, but it's making me. We're going to figure it out. All right, and we're back. And if this stalls again, I'm just not going to do full screen playing. So what I'm using right now is called the iDisplay Pro. And the only reason I switched is that it's the one that will do 64-bit graphics. So if you have 64-bit graphics in your operating system, you will need this. It's 32-bit graphics for the previous two things. If you have a printer at home, this is called the i1 Studio. It does both monitors and printers. You only need one product for both things. We will be talking about printer calibration in a little bit, so keep that in mind there. Okay, so we're going to do some before and afters. Before, and this is just what the monitor is showing, not the edit. This not profiles, just what the monitor is showing. So before, and watch the pink in the amusement park ride in particular. So before and after. And we're gonna do it again. Before and after. So my my display was not showing me every color that I wanted to see. And the first time that you do a monitor calibration, also you're going to find that your monitor is way too bright. And so your pictures are darker than you think they are. monitors are inevitably set too bright. And one of the best things people can do is turn down that brightness when they're doing workflow. Here we are again. It turned out that not only was it too bright, but also my skin tones were wrong because it was shifting color. So before and after. And you can see that before and after. So I would have been, if I was working without monitor calibration, I would have been adding a lot of warm tones to my images to try to get my skin tones to be correct without actually doing this. Once you've calibrated your monitor and used a custom profile, you have full color spectrum to work with, and you're actually looking at it. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's when you can actually get down to the business of editing and getting your workflow to actually operate for you. So this is kind of a good transition time to talk about color space and ICC. I want to do that because we're going to be talking about processing and color space. We're going to be talking here about different color spaces for different usages, which is not thought about often enough. And it's important to kind of at this point really to be thinking about color space as something used for different purposes, right? So not enough people actually know what a color space looks like. So I actually want to show you what a color space looks like. Color spaces, we think of like that big footprint looking thing that they always draw, and we say this much is Adobe RGB and this one's ProPhoto RGB, which is nice, but I actually really want you to take a look. So this is the Adobe RGB color space right here. And not enough people know that color spaces are actually three-dimensional. So bright on top, dark on bottom, and it's supposed to be a cube in case you wanted to know. And so we are missing the chunks that are outside of the cube, essentially. Now, we talk about this idea of Adobe RGB being a larger, for comparison, of Adobe RGB being a larger color space than sRGB. And you can actually look at that. So this is sRGB inside of an Adobe RGB space. So what we can see is that they're actually have a lot of the same colors over here in blues and purples, but we're missing this giant chunk here in the greens section right there. So sRGB is a noticeably smaller color space than Adobe RGB. What I don't have loaded on here is the Pro RGB color space, but it is bigger still. It's got about 99% of naturally occurring colors. So that's actually what a color space looks like. By the way, anybody who's got a Mac, this is Color Sync Utility. You can play this little game yourself because it's cool to be able to see what that difference is. So let's kind of talk about these. Notice that what we're talking about here has absolutely nothing to do with choosing sRGB or Adobe RGB inside of your camera. In fact, you should probably never touch that menu option in your life. And the reason is this only affects shooting JPEGs. All right. So the color space choice inside of your camera is the color space recorded when you shoot a JPEG image. Raw images do not have a natural color space to them. We might say ProPhoto RGB. ProPhoto RGB is what's running in the background of Lightroom. It's what's running in the background of Capture One. So we don't actually collapse into a full color, into a recognized normalized color space until we export from a raw image into a TIFF or a JPEG. And so this is that thing that you've probably seen a dozen times before. That's that footprint. And they say, oh, I have Adobe RGB. It's bigger than sRGB. And now we know how much bigger it is. But in fact, there is a little bit more to the story. There's more nuance to this. And I do want to kind of elaborate on it a little bit. I think that that is useful. So sRGB actually has a number of uses. All right. Whatever the weakest point in the chain is going to be the color space you end up working inside of, and I'll give you some examples. So right now, I'm being broadcast over the internet, and the internet is actually programmed exclusively in sRGB. So if we're showing images electronically, if we're putting them on a website, if we're bragging to our friends on Facebook, it doesn't matter if you actually exported the image as an Adobe RGB file, it is collapsed into an sRGB file when it is online, because that's how the internet is programmed, is in sRGB. If you are producing this image in some kind of a capacity, you need to know the actual color space of the production mechanism, and I'll give you some examples. If you're printing 4x6s or 8x10s off of a mini lab, those are sRGB color space. They just, as a rule throughout the production industry, they are sRGB. If you are printing images inside of some kind of a book, photo book, larger kind of publication, those are sRGB. If you're doing more specialized type of materials, such as metal prints, canvases, printing onto some other more exotic materials, those are sRGB. So if you have a great file that you love and you're working with this and you love this giant large color space inside of it, then there are certain color reproduction types, or just production types with larger color space, that you can work inside of. So if I wanted to, when I print like an 8x10 for the wall, when I'm producing something in my cheat sheets or something else I'm physically producing, I don't even bother looking at Adobe RGB for the file that I'm exporting. It's meaningless. You might as well just produce it, export out of your photo editing software as an sRGB file, meaning you work with it in RAW in photo editing. When you go to print, you choose the color space that you want it exported as, because we don't print a RAW file, obviously. We print a TIFF or a JPEG. You choose the color space at that point. And if my reproduction method is from a mini lab, if it's a specialty, I do have a wall in my house with all metal prints on it. I love it, but they're all sRGB. I've printed canvases for my parents, and those are sRGB. I just create that file as an sRGB file. Now, if I'm going to use the same image to reproduce a couple different things, so for instance, I took one image, I printed it as a nice enlargement of my son. It's hanging in the house. I took the same image, and I produced it on a blanket for my parents for Hanukkah. I actually exported two versions of that file, a RAW file for the enlargement, more on that in a second, and an sRGB for the blanket. Two different files of the same image to get the most out of the image in each reproduction mechanism. Okay, so if you are producing an enlargement, that's where Adobe RGB comes into play. So when we have large inkjet printers, dye sublimation printers, just think of larger print types, those tend to be Adobe RGB units. And so now I can export an Adobe RGB file. Now I can print that and maintain that color space in reproduction. By the way, if you want to know with a particular production that you're doing, what color space you should be exporting in, this is why we have photo finishing experts at Mike's Camera, is specifically to be able to guide people through these types of questions, right? Being able to come in and talk and figure out what color space, what megabyte file size you're exporting out to be able to get the best possible reproduction. So that's why they're there, is to be able to help people with that. Because if you produce an Adobe RGB image and we print you an sRGB file, it's the file and the mechanism. We didn't change your color space. Now, it's also important to note that monitors are sRGB. And here's an interesting little point. There are a couple monitors, and I promise you know if you have one, that are Adobe RGB monitors. The first way that you know is they plaster that information all over the box, because you should know that you're getting something for your money. And they will say produces 99% of Adobe RGB or whatever. I am teaching this right now off of a MacBook Pro. And sitting also, you can't see it from this camera vantage point, but also sitting in this office is an iMac, a 27-inch iMac. Everything from Mac with a screen built in is an sRGB monitor. The average monitor that you get for any machine is an sRGB monitor. You'll also know that you have an Adobe RGB monitor because, frankly, you paid a lot more money for it. And so it's actually kind of tricky to edit an Adobe RGB file specifically tailored to your liking because you're not actually viewing it on your monitor. That doesn't mean it's not worthwhile, but it does mean if there is a difference in color, a greater variety of color reproduced in a larger production than you saw on your monitor, it very well might be that you had an Adobe RGB file and you were viewing a trimmed back version of it when you were editing. And so that's an important thing just to note there. So there are really two companies that make just color standardization equipment. Everything that I have personally used is from a company called X-Rite. And they make this guy here. X-Rite's just listed at the bottom of the box there. There's one other company that's called Spyder, S-P-Y-D-E-R. Now, the reason I can wholeheartedly recommend Spyder, even though I have not used their products, is because they do everything to what's called ICC standard. ICC is International Color Consortium, and they are the governing body on color. So if you have something that is ICC standardized, it will then look the same as if it were from another company. So Spyder does wonderful calibration kits. I've met many customers who are very happy with their products. Even though I haven't used them, I can recommend them as a result. Okay, so that's what you're looking for, by the way, when you're looking at anything that is going to be, actually, let me just drop that down there. Yeah.
Real quick, Joe, there was one question that came in here while we have a second here. Nona asked a good question. She asks, what brightness do you calibrate your monitor to?
I don't do a specific one. When you do a monitor calibration, it will bring back color and it will change brightness. So I let the software do that for me. The thing you'll notice when you do a monitor calibration is that it will inevitably get darker than factory specs, but I let the software do that aspect for me. So that's a fantastic question because they are typically too bright. Other thing that is worth noting is calibration is more of a lifestyle than a one thing that you do because all monitors drift over time. Desktops drift a lot slower than laptops because with the laptop, we take the screen and we shut it frequently. And so you have to do a laptop about every 2 weeks, a desktop about every month in order to get basically no variation in your workflow. I just skipped, I would say that I did a monitor calibration of my laptop today and I hadn't done it. I was lazy. I hadn't done it in 2 months and it was a pretty noticeable drift in that period of time, both in the brightness and in the color being reproduced. But don't try to set that manually because you won't know when you're looking at something that is accurate. It's much, especially given if you have windows in the room or whatever, it is much better to let the software do that. So that's a fantastic question. All right, let's talk about printing. And I want to first talk about something called soft proofing here. You can't actually preview soft proofing until you actually have a home printer with the profiles for that printer loaded. So I can't actually show you this since I work at Mike's Camera. I do all my production through Mike's Camera for obvious reasons. But I want to talk about what this is, and I can show you what it looks like in software. So the worst thing you could do is go to all this trouble and edit a bunch of stuff. And then when you go to print it, allow the printer to do an auto enhancement of the image because you just threw away everything you just did. So if you're printing at home and you go through this, you turn off any edits being done by the printer. Likewise, if you are giving a file that you have actually edited and looked at like this to a reproduction company like Mike's, then what you want to make sure that you're doing is telling us, hey, no edits on that. I took care of it. We're more than happy to oblige, of course. Now, one thing you can do is do something called soft proofing. And this is going to examine a concept called out of gamut colors. So let's talk about what that means. Imagine we've got a circle that contains every single naturally occurring color. Just imagine that color wheel, right, that we all drew as kids in school. Okay. We've been able to build back out that color by having a camera calibration. But then when we export into a particular color space, we lose some of it. And you'll notice I skipped over ProPhoto RGB in that previous conversation when we're talking here. And I just realized the typo says Profit RGB. That's funny. So ProPhoto RGB is about 99% of naturally occurring colors, but there are only about 3 printers in the entire North America that can actually print in ProPhoto RGB. And they're very large for large commercial work, and they're very expensive. And so we never actually produce anything, and we never view in ProPhoto RGB. No monitor in the world can display it, and no printer that you or I has ever printed with can actually produce it. And so when we go into a color space from an image, we lose a little bit of that color, and then we need to think about the loss of color regarding the production mechanism. And that's going to be the paper type and the printer we're using. So let's say that we've got a Canon Pro 10 printer. This is a 10 ink cartridge dye sublimation printer, and we're going to be producing off of it. So that printer, being a 10 ink cartridge printer, is going to have another loss of color. And then the paper type that it has is going to be another loss of color. If you have a glossy paper, it's going to maintain more than like a bamboo or a silk fiber. Those more specialty paper types have a loss of color as well. So the difference between the color that is in a file and the color that can be reproduced physically by a mechanism, that difference is called out of gamut colors. There's a gamut that the paper going through that printer can actually reproduce, and any color that's outside of that is out of that gamut. So if you want to view the difference in color between the file and the production mechanism, this is called soft proofing. I'll actually show you this in Capture One. So let's say that I've got this image. Okay, let's say that I go and I want to print it. If I do, I'm going to turn off Managed by Printer, and I'm going to say I'm going to be making an Adobe RGB file. And then from here, I have 4 choices of what's called rendering intent. And the difference between these is my soft proofing choice. And soft proofing is basically asking the question of what the heck are we supposed to do with these colors that are not in gamut? All right, what are we supposed to do with these? There are technically listed 4 options, and that's a giant mistake by the software companies. There should only be 2, and I will explain why. Okay, so you're saying that I say never use absolute or saturation. Those 2 are the last 2 listed. There is no time when a photographer would ever use those, and I will explain why. But the main 2 choices you have are perceptual color metric and relative color metric. So imagine that we've got this kind of awkwardly shaped thing that used to be a circle. That's the colors reproducible by this paper through this printer. And there are colors in our file that are out of gamut. So the question is, what do we do with those colors? And this is our soft proofing question. Not enough people actually know that this is a thing, and this will change your result with some images. You do have to, like I said, you have to have the actual profile for that paper through that printer to be able to soft proof, but that's a free download, and we'll talk about that. So if I was to take these bits of color and I just move them in to the closest place That is called relative color metric. So I just take the out of gamut colors and I move them into the closest color that's reproducible. I change nothing else. Boom, boom, I'm done. It's called relative color metric because the color is changed to what is relatively similar. The problem is, what if I have a big swath of blue that cannot be reproduced by this particular paper on this particular printer, and I have a big area of sky in this particular image that actually has a lot of variation to it. But the second I bring it into the gamut, all of those become the same shade. And now they've clumped together into just big blotches of exactly the same color tone. That looks very, very weird in the actual print. And so if you have that situation come up, you need to do perceptual color metric. But if you don't get clumping, relative color metric is the least change. It is the least alteration of your images. So it is the one that's preferred the most frequently. If you do have a situation where bringing in the out of gamut colors will will clump a lot of stuff together, you can do perceptual. This is where you bring in the colors that are out of gamut, and if they basically clone other colors that are in gamut that are similar to that hue will shift around so that the amount of variation maintains constancy. All right. There will be no clumping in perceptual color metric, but you will get shifting of colors that are actually in gamut. All right. So I would say most photographers do relative color metric by default, unless they have an image with a bunch of out of gamut colors, all of the same hue, and it forms clumping in the soft proof of the soft proofing. In that case, they choose perceptual. Okay, so why don't we use absolute or saturation? The reason is that they are not made for photography. Absolute is actually made for the medical industry, and saturation is made for cartography. Absolute is where there's a couple particular shades, and they are always exactly the same because they are related to diagnosis, and you definitely don't want any shifting or changing of that. The rest of the colors can be all wonky. It doesn't matter. There's a couple things that are constant, and they're not changed because they're related to diagnosis for medical practitioners. And so it's just not used in photography. Saturation will totally change color, but it will maintain the actual degree of change of saturation. This is for cartography, because you'll see maps and there'll be different changes in saturation levels of a color based on rainfall or population density or elevation or whatever. So absolute and saturation are not in any way for photography. Don't use them for any of your workflow in photography. Okay, so if I am printing at home, I will need a profile of this particular paper on this particular printer. And it is different for every paper on every printer. There are two ways of getting this profile. The first is the easiest way, and that's downloading it right from the paper manufacturer. And so this is from Ilford's, I believe, Ilford's website, if I remember correctly. And it is this set of gallery premium papers on just just a big selection of Canon printers. And so you can download that profile, and then it will actually know the color reproduced by that paper on that printer. And now you can soft proof it, and you can actually know that since these are an Icc profile, you take that print, you hold it up, it's going to look like your monitor. That's how it's done. Now, these are a little bit conservative, so that you know. They know that there might be variation, like someone's ink might be older than someone else's, and so they tend to be a little bit conservative. Or maybe you have a printer that they don't have the profile for. It's very rare, but it happens. And that's where an actual printer calibration tool comes into play. And so the i1 Studio is the one that does 64-bit graphics. It will do monitors and it'll do printers. You use the software to print with whatever paper you're going to make a profile for. It prints a color swatch. This guy here has a light inside of it, and yes, it knows the Kelvin of the light. And you just run it in the direction of the swatches. They have little arrows, and it builds a profile for that paper on that printer. And it's the most accurate way of knowing the gamut of that combination. Now you can soft proof it. Once you've done that, we're actually chained all the way through from beginning to end, right? So at that point, I've got knowledge that I have full color spectrum in the file. I know when I'm editing it, I'm actually looking at my real file, right? I'm not messing around with it. I'm not looking at a drifted monitor. I can export the color profile that's going to be the best for my production. And then I can actually know what the gamut of colors in my production medium are going to be. And once I've done that, I've got a chain where I know exactly what I'm going to get. My monitor is going to look like my print. And I know exactly what it's going to look like in terms of brightness and in terms of color. And that's it. That's our process. Like I said, it is not in any way it's not a tricky process. It's not a non-understandable thing. It's just one of those things that we kind of think ourselves through. And once you've built it the first time, you just run it and it takes up no time in your editing, but it makes a big difference in your results. So that's what I've got for you there. And let's see if anyone wants to ask me anything about it.
Well, thank you, Joe. That was very informative. And yeah, we do have a couple of additional questions that have come through here. And I've got a couple myself too. So does the camera profile created by the color check passport travel with your picture? Wondering how we can ensure it's still applied if using anything other than Photoshop, Lightroom, Capture One?
So the profile that you build is something that X-Rite basically needs to work in with these softwares for them to be able to read the profiles that they build. So right now you do have to be running an Adobe product or Capture One in order to be able to do this. And you can then copy and paste that one profile. Like I've had a couple clients that we've built it in Lightroom, and then we've taken that same profile, we've copied it, and we've put it into Photoshop on different cameras, on different machines, sorry. And because that is a profile for that camera in that lighting condition read by in Adobe software. So yes, you can actually port those around and use them. I've never tried to take the same profile from Adobe, put it into Capture One. I don't know if that would port perfectly, but you really only need to build it that one time for whatever software you are working with. Does that kind of answer the question, we think?
I believe that does, yeah. And then, so my follow-up question, and I think you already answered it too in that. So once, let's say I have a camera and I use that and I use it outdoors to establish that profile for that camera, then that profile, I will continue to use that profile whenever I'm processing and so forth from that point forward.
Yep.
For that, regardless of whether I'm shooting, say, like outdoor landscape, sunrise, sunset, middle of the day, flash photography, indoors.
You ask a good question. I'll give you my experience and I'll give you the official line from X-Rite. The official line from X-Rite is that shade attenuates out warm part of the color spectrum. And so we should have to build a profile for shade separately from direct daylight. And so you'll notice the name of mine was A7R for daylight. I also have built it for shade and for studio lighting. And so it's just taking a picture and then building it again. It takes a couple minutes and you're done anytime you're in that lighting condition. Now, I found that the difference between my shade profile and my daylight was so minuscule that I just by default use my daylight. That's my experience. That is not the official line from X-Rite. But you'll be able to use those profiles so long as you're using the same camera in that type of light. And daylight is daylight. It's, 5,600 degrees Kelvin. Shade, sunrise, sunset might be different. But if you're wondering, you take another picture, you build a profile, it takes you an additional 5 minutes. That would be the full answer there.
Okay. Let's see here. Another question that Nona had here. That was Liz. Thank you, by the way, for your
Thanks,
question.
Joe.
Thank you, Liz. Good to kind of see you.
And then Nona asks, another question here is, would you convert to the profile for the paper prior to soft proofing?
So I would want to have the actual profile for the paper before I soft proof. I can't soft proof without having the profile for that particular paper on that particular printer. Otherwise, I'm not actually measuring what result I'm going to get. But I would have to have that loaded with my profiles beforehand. So I think that's answering that. Let me know if not. But it would be in that particular order.
Hey,
Okay.
Joe, can you go into Photoshop and show us what you're saying right now?
I cannot. I do not have Adobe products on this machine.
Oh, okay.
You'll find a bunch of YouTube videos about it on Photoshop or Lightroom, but I do not use Adobe, and so I cannot. I'd be happy to if I did.
So a question that I had real quick too was with regards to paper, and you had all the different paper profiles and so forth. So if we are, let's say we're having some, that we've done all of our work and so forth, and we're ready to create the print file that we're going to be, sending over to Mike's camera, say to have to print it. Will we be, do you have a set of the paper profiles that we should be loading as the paper profile that we should be calibrating our image to on our computer as we're preparing that file?
That's a fantastic question. So wherever you're doing a production, it's worth asking them for the profile. And I'll tell you what's going on at Mike's. We'd be happy to give it to you, but our machine manufacturer won't give it to us. So it's actually impossible producing through Mike's camera, and I guess anybody else who has machines from the same company, of getting the profiles. Well, it actually would be the paper. It's not the machine, it's the paper company. But we actually cannot get them. Some paper companies who work with printing outfits do provide that, and some don't. And so it's always worth asking. I definitely would. And I can just tell you that they won't give them to Mike's camera. Otherwise, we'd be happy to give them to you. Heck, if it were me and I was, if I had them and I was Mike's camera, I would just put a part of our website where it's just downloaded directly from there, because it's a very good service to have. So I would download that. In lieu of that, the best thing that you can do is examine the image, I suppose, with actually looking at, this, that I could select just Adobe RGB or sRGB. That is not perfect because the color is missing part of the spectrum from there. Glossy is missing almost nothing relative to Adobe RGB. Canvas is missing a noticeable amount more. But that's the best thing that you can do. And that's just availability of the profile.
Okay, so probably just use the I'll say within, I'm just saying, Lightroom, and I'm sure whether Capture One or Photoshop, the same thing, using their default, say Adobe RGB or whatever, and that is.
Yeah, it won't take that particular paper into account, but at least you'll get a generalized idea of what your relatively should be. And if you're doing a standardized paper, gloss, semi-gloss, luster, it's not going to be demonstrably different in almost every case.
Hey, Joe, what about, I know there's a website called Dry Creek Photo. They do have some profile labs. I mean, I'm looking at Colorado, and it's primarily just Costco. They have printer labs for both their glossy and luster paper.
Mhm.
Is that a pretty good place to start? Obviously, if you're just using Costco, because they don't list any other labs there.
Yeah, I think that I haven't looked at that particular website, but that's a really good service to be able to have there. So I think it is worth checking out. But I haven't used that, so I couldn't speak to them directly. But that's exactly the kind of thing we would ideally want, is being able to download the profile from anything that we're outsourcing. So yeah.
Okay.
And Elaine asks a good question here too. And keep in mind that our competition this next couple weeks is on still life, or that's one of the categories. She says, do you use color checker profile you set up when shooting products / still life, or do you place the color checker in the scene, snap on the image, and use that for post-processing?
That's a great question. So what really matters is we're measuring this camera in this light. So I have one profile for my strobes, and it doesn't matter if I'm doing a portrait, if I'm doing a product shot, it doesn't matter if I'm doing a still life, if I'm lighting a macro image, that's all the same profile. And so I do have one for my strobes. And so you want to actually measure the light that your camera is recording, right? So it does need to be held out in the actual environment. If you're, so here's, I'll tell you the way that we tell people to do it in portraiture environments, and then just reproduce this effect if you're doing macro or if you're doing still life. So if I'm doing a portrait shot and I haven't worked with the set of strobes before, the very first image I do is I just have them hold this guy up just like this, and I shoot a picture of it. Notice that that's going to be the light hitting it. That will be the same light that's lighting my subject. So I would actually just set it. And when I did some product shots recently, I just took this and I just leaned it inside of that same space where where the product would sit, snap a picture, and I removed it. It takes just a second to shoot, 5 minutes to build the profile, and you're done. But yeah, you would be placing it, and you only need to do that once for a particular set of lights, ever. It's not based on the subject matter, just the lighting situation. So tell me if I missed part of answering that, but I think that that answers that question there. But yeah, that's how you do it.
Okay, great. No, that's helpful. And then Carino asks, what profile would you use for metal?
Metal is an sRGB production. Now, metal is actually very, very strange. Metal is actually done through sublimation. It's so the actual process of metal, you're never going to color match a metal print. And I'll just tell you that now, and I'll tell you why. Because I've ran through this a few times with myself and with customers, but they actually build one thing and then they actually put it into a chamber and they actually sublimate, and the gas comes up, and then that's actually what is going to create the exposure on the metal plate. That process inherently has a color change to it, okay? There is actually no way of perfectly controlling it. It's just not a thing. And so the best thing you can do is know that it is based around sRGB. It is not going to be Adobe RGB color space, and there is color shift. I cannot control metal the way that I can acrylic, or the way that I can canvas, or the way that I can normal prints. It's the nature of metal. Is that it has a color shift. It is a weird, I think they're gorgeous, but there is a certain amount of non-controllability to metal prints. That's not a reason to not do them. I love them, but just run sRGB and know that there's a certain amount of.
So Joe, follow-up question.
Yeah.
So let's say you print on metal and it comes out fabulous. Then you go back to the same printer and you want to get that same print done again. Is it even possible then for them to create the same image?
Well, it's going to be very likely that it will be next to the same, because it's the same machine doing it. But you can't really go and say, can you take it and shift the magenta specifically to look like this or whatever. We can't do that kind of matching, but you use the same machine to produce the same image, you will get the same result. I had a situation with a good customer of mine, this is about 3-4 years ago now, where we were doing a metal print of a deer. And I was actually there when he shot the picture. And he was doing metal prints. And this was before I learned, this is just, so the funny story here is just that if people just communicate, life gets easier, right? And it was not the picture, and we reproduced it, and it was not the picture, and we redid it, and it was not the picture. And we started shifting his image to try to like correct for the printer. And we actually ended up doing like 8 or 12 of pictures of this deer, until finally I called them, and my lab that does this, I said, so just talk to me, what's going on? They go, oh, well, it's dye sublimation. You actually can't control it. I was like, if you just told us that, he's a totally understanding guy. And so we actually did like 12, well, I actually have like 3 of them hanging up in the break room of the Mike's camera at Lone Tree, this one deer picture, just because we have them lying around. And they're all the same, right? They're all the same. They're all shifted in the same way, but they're all identical. So you shouldn't have a problem of reproduction of the same one from the same machine. We just can't do the kind of color matching that we can with printer calibration. So hopefully that kind of answers your question there.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, of course.
Let's see here. We've got one more out there right now that is says, Phil asks, what space do you set your editing software to?
So your editing software doesn't need to have a space set to it. You shoot in RAW, you do not have a natural color space outside of realistically ProPhoto RGB. Your editing software is actually running ProPhoto RGB in the background. And that's actually the color space it can hold. And then you don't collapse into a color space until you export a TIFF or a JPEG. Now, in order to produce a file, we have to export into a TIFF or a JPEG, but we don't actually make that decision until the moment of exporting. You would say, if you were to say that your software was running as a, I had Indian food for dinner, and it's still very spicy in my mouth. Cool. So we would say that if your software was set to anything in particular color space wise, it'd be sRGB, but that's only because your monitor is sRGB. Your image, we don't even think color space until we do our export. Until then, you're actually running ProPhoto RGB in the background.
So Joe, should you also take into account what size bit file that the company producing your photos is about to use? 8-bit
No.
versus 16-bit versus whatever? Because most people reduce the file size, don't they?
Yeah, people typically reduce their file size. I've not worried about that too much. Because the bit size really kind of gets decided when you do a JPEG. Like a JPEG is going to be an 8-bit file, right? And the bit size gets decided by the file type that you end up exporting as. You're realistically, you're shooting your 12-bit raw file or your 14-bit raw file. And we don't necessarily need to think about that in terms of the editing, because the file type itself is going to be the determining factor on that. So that kind of becomes the nature of it.
I was also just kind of curious, what do you do with your portraits? In other words, if I shoot a wedding where I know that the indoors is a nice yellow warm light and I correct to what it should be, then it's going to come off looking cold and whatever. So, I mean, for product photography outdoors, so much as this is fantastic, but I'm just kind of curious your own kind of thought process when it comes down to portraits.
Sure. So remember that the white balance swatches on the Color Checker Passport for portraits actually have a neutral, and then they have cooler and cooler and cooler ones, which of course will then correct to warmer skin tone. So I don't think there's anything wrong with correcting and doing a white balance that actually warms up the scene, right? I think that there's a lot of reason that we would do that. Don't forget that white balance is about neutral point. And if we want neutral point to be warm, we make neutral point warm. There's nothing wrong with that, to do it very intentionally and mindfully. And the profile is about full color spectrum. So even if I'm going to warm up the image, I still want to have all of my greens, all of my blues, all of my purples, etc. So I actually prefer doing my white balance off of a picture of my passport, because it gives me an easy way of being able to warm skin tone in those small incremental ways, just off of it. Of course, I could run my profile very, very easily, and then I could grab my Kelvin slider and I could warm it. Of course, I could do it that way as well, and it'd be totally fine. But I don't think that the two things are mutually exclusive by any means to them. So that'd be my thought process.
Have you ever met a commercial photographer that shoots like clothing? I met one at a convention once, and the poor guy was just about insane because, you know, if you put out a product photography thing of a green shirt in the LL Bean catalog, it better be exactly the same color.
Yep.
And those guys are just absolutely insane as far as printing and color checking and whatever. So I feel
Oh,
bad.
yeah. It's their livelihood, right? You've got to represent it. I've been fortunate enough to work with a product photographer, wonderful, wonderful product photographer named Heidi Jewell in the Denver area. And she hires me to do all of her lighting design. And we did the same thing, color checker passport. We had to build profiles because she shoots Canon, so she can't use the profiles that I built for my system. And we've done indoor, we've done outdoor, always using my strobes. And yeah, we're doing that exact same thing because we've shot bags. That was the most color intensive one, and we want to get that exactly right for the client. So yeah, it's part of your living at that point. We did some shooting for a cutting board company, and we did a shoot at Left Hand Brewing Company. They were not nearly as finicky about color because that's not a part of their product, right? But yeah, clothing photographers, we shot Sherpani bags, and that's a nice vibrant color bag. It's made up in Boulder. And you better believe that we were very, very picky about reproducing correct color. And fortunately, once you make one correct profile, you can just apply it to everything in a shoot and you're done. It doesn't take up extra time, but you better have that profile and you better capture it right in that light that you're shooting in order to be that degree of accuracy. Because yeah, the really annoying thing is if I shoot something that's perfect and then I send it to somebody using a really junky $100 monitor that's 5 years old, that's never been calibrated, they're going to look at my image and just go, oh, this is totally wrong. And no, it's not. You need a better monitor. But there's nothing we can do to control that, right? So
Let's see here. There's a couple more items out here on the chat. I'll go in a reverse order here. Elaine has a good point here. She says, I think I read somewhere that whiskey producers are real picky about color, or are picky about color. So
I would not be surprised because it's a big advertising and cultural part of exactly the tone and the color of that product. So that would not surprise me at all. I've never been fortunate enough to shoot for a whiskey producer, but I imagine that would be something they care very, very deeply about. Interestingly, when I shot Left Hand Brewing Company, the one thing they cared about, the absolute essential must-have, the image is no good without this, is anytime you're holding a can or a beer, you must be holding it with your left hand. Because they accidentally put out one image on Instagram one time where it was being held by a right hand, and they got so much hell on Instagram for that now they're unbelievably cautious. So if you look at their advertising, anybody holding a product is holding it with their left hand. And it was the one instruction that was absolutely sacrosanct. They're like, you can play around with anything else, but do not break this rule. So everyone's different.
Let's see here. Another question out there. David asks, how can I tell whether I have a 64-bit graphics? And if so, how important is it to have the 64-bit monitor calibration software?
Sure. You can tell by just looking up what your operating system is and then Googling it, right? If you're using whatever operating system, what bit graphics, it'll pull up. That's what it's tell. And then it's actually a necessity thing. If you have a 32-bit graphic calibrator, like the Color Monkey display, it just will not work. The software just will not work on your machine, and it will they won't tell you why. They'll just say this is not compatible, which is why I'm telling you that, so you don't struggle with that question. But it just won't work. It won't even run. And so if you have 64, and we're all eventually going to have 64-bit graphics, right? If you don't already, because that's just obviously the direction of operating systems. So if I were buying a new calibrator today, the only one I would consider would be the i1, the i1 calibrator, because whether or not I have 64-bit now, I'm gonna need it in the future, right? But that's how you tell. And if you get a 32-bit one and then it won't run on your machine, that's the reason why.
Well, thank you. I don't see any other questions out there. If anybody has anything, feel free to raise your hand or put something in the chat. Otherwise, again, thank you very much. I learned quite a bit tonight about color. I always think I know a fair amount about this, but there was a lot more great detail on that, on some of the things you covered. And one of the things, while I do have a calibration, it's the Color Monkey display. So I suppose at some point that one probably gets to get replaced by the other one that you just referenced.
Whenever it's necessary. Yeah, don't do it until it's actually required by your operating system. But
Right.
I consider the monitor calibrator the absolute best value for money that's $200 in photography. Easily the best way of spending $200 in photography, where you get the most out of it, is monitor calibration. And the Color Checker Passport is like $100. So this is, in photography world, this is not expensive stuff, as we all know, but it's very, very meaningful stuff. So
yeah, the color check. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, helpful, very helpful.
Good.
Yeah, the Color Checker Passport is one of those things that I don't have yet. So I will be in at Mike's camera here in the next week to pick up one of those. So
More stuff to buy, right?
right.
Yeah, we're basically like goldfish, aren't we, with photography gear? We just keep growing. So.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and the information was very helpful. Thanks again, Joe.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Good seeing everybody. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, with that, we'll let everybody have a good evening. Go watch it snow.
Yeah, we have a, let's see. So again, it's the, in 2 weeks, I believe it is, the next competition. So be sure and get together your photos on, again, what we said was the
28.
Yeah, 28th is when they get submitted in that. But again,
the third is the date of the competition. March 3rd.
March 3, correct. Correct.
All right.
Okay. Great. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you for all your attendance.
Have a good night.
Thank you.